This week I asked you to read 3 articles that reflect on the research process. The articles are written by 3 well-known social scientists, Kenneth Pruitt, Doug Massey, and Ruth Milkman. Now, what I really like about these articles is that they give you a sense of social research as it's practiced. We can talk all we want about evaluation research and research ethics, but until we consider actual lived research experiences, we'll never get a sense of what research looks like. In many cases, research can be frustrating, messy, and surprising. Let's start with the article by Kenneth Pruitt called Walking the Fault Line. Between 1998 and 2001, Pruitt was the director of the U.S. Census Bureau. He's now a professor at public affairs at Columbia University. Pruitt calls the census the longest continuous scientific project in American history. The U.S. Census is basically a count of everyone residing in the United States. It takes place every 10 years and it's mandated by the U.S. Constitution. Now, its original aim was to apportion seats in the U.S. House of Representatives, but today it also helps determine over $200 billion in federal formula spending. Now, Pruitt was the director of the census for the 2 years during which the 2000 census took place, and one of the major controversies during his tenure was the census undercount. Basically, not everyone is counted in the census, especially if they're a racial ethnic minority, if they're poor, and/or if they're homeless. The best way to deal with the undercount, according to sociologists, is to draw a large sample to provide a second estimate of the population. Now, a sample is different from a census. In a census, you count absolutely everybody. In a sample, you draw out a subset of the population, and that subset stands in for or represents the population. Now, you'd think that a census would be more accurate than a sample, but in fact it's not. There are so many people living in the United States that it's incredibly difficult to count everyone. So in this case, using a sample to estimate the population turns out to be more accurate in the long run. So sociologists suggest that we go ahead and do the census, count everyone in the population, but then that we also draw out a sample and devise a second estimate of the population. And then we use that second estimate to adjust the initial census count. It turned out that this suggestion was incredibly controversial. Republicans in Congress charged Democrats with trying to increase the count of poor people and racial ethnic minorities who often vote Democratic. The Democrats charged Republicans with wanting to disenfranchise poor people and racial ethnic minorities. Pruitt, in the meantime, was caught in the middle. In the next article you read, Doing Race with a White Face, sociologist Doug Massey reflects on what it's like to research race and race relations as a white man. In 1993, Massey co-authored a book called American Apartheid, in which he examined racial segregation in housing. Now, the book was in part a response to a highly publicized work published by another sociologist named William Julius Wilson. Wilson was looking at black inner-city poverty, and he argued that the major problems of blacks in inner-city neighborhoods was not so much racism, but class inequality. Specifically, factories in cities throughout America were closing and relocating overseas to low-wage countries, which left millions of black men out of work. Massey disagreed with his argument to some extent. He showed evidence of persistent racial segregation in housing, such that blacks got trapped in these inner-city neighborhoods where factories were indeed closing. He used census data to show that the cities most affected by factory closures were also those cities most affected by racial segregation in housing. And he cited studies showing that real estate agents were channeling blacks to predominantly black urban neighborhoods where decay and joblessness were rampant. Now, to many, the irony of this whole debate between Wilson and Massey was that Wilson, who argued that racism was on the decline, is black, and Massey, who argued that racism is still entrenched, is white. As Massey explains, the irony of the white sociologist emphasizing race and the black sociologist emphasizing class was not lost on me, but in all my conversations with Bill, that's Wilson, the issue of our respective racial backgrounds never came up. But race seemed to matter a great deal to those who attended our debates. Massey explains that he wants people to pay more attention to his data and his methods than to his skin color. But the reality is that when we report our findings and speak publicly about these issues, our personal backgrounds and attributes often become important. Let's now turn to your third and final piece, linking research and advocacy. This piece was written by Ruth Milkman, who directs the Institute of Industrial Relations at UCLA. Milkman is a well-known sociologist who studied gender, labor, and workplace relations. In 2002, the country's first paid family leave program was signed into law in the state of California. The program went well beyond the federal Family and Medical Leave Act, known as FMLA. Now, the federal program, FMLA, allows workers who are eligible to take up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave to take care of a newborn or a very sick family member. The problem is that it isn't paid, and because it's not paid, most workers don't take FMLA. In addition, a lot of workers aren't eligible. To be eligible, you have to work in a workplace that has 50 or more employees. In contrast, the California program provides 55% of weekly earnings for up to 6 weeks, and almost all private sector workers are eligible. Now, when California's Paid Family Leave Act was passed in 2002, Milkman thought that a before and after study to assess the program's impact would be interesting. As she describes it, she didn't want to actually conduct the study. She was trying to convince others to do it because she had her own research projects going on and she was overextended. But when no one stepped up to the plate, she decided that she had to actually do the study. So she gets funding to distribute surveys to workers and employers before and after the law went into effect. In addition, she got funding to interview managers to learn how workplaces handled family leave, again, before and after the law went into effect. Initially, many of the advocates of the paid family leave program were nervous about Milkman conducting the research. They feared that Milkman might find some negative aspects of the program, and if she were to publish it, it would, in effect, shed a bad light on paid family leave. As a social scientist, of course, Milkman was interested in whatever the data revealed and demanded that she have the right to publish whatever she found about the program, whether it was positive or negative. Each of these pieces provides a little bit of insight into the experience of conducting research and the kinds of research that social scientists do. From using census data to understand racial segregation in housing, to conducting surveys and interviews to understand a family leave program, social scientists investigate questions that have both theoretical and applied relevance. But in conducting their research, social scientists also encounter politics in the field, from a Congress suspicious of a government population count to advocates who want to make sure a study sheds a good light on their policy. In the end, there's a technical side to research and an everyday side to research. Remember that when you're actually conducting research, a whole slew of issues may arise, since social science research doesn't happen in a laboratory, but in the social world where relationships and politics always play a role. Thank you.